if you're in the middle of growing your brands, or if you're in the early stages and you look around, you look at the space, you see the gurus scamming people left and right, you see them grifting courses, you see them doing one-on-one coaching and not even being available for their students, and you wonder, how am I going to fit in this space? How am I going to position myself as if everybody's a scammer? If I genuinely have the intention to help people and make a difference and literally build something that lasts, build an actual brand. If you're in the middle of all of this and you have that fear, this video is going to be perfect for you, because I'm going to break down the difference between a scammer and between actually a cult brand, and how you can achieve that no matter what industry you're in. And just for personal context, I used to have that fear, right? So last year, I really took off on Instagram. My entire life changed. I talked about it so many times. And I went from essentially 0 followers at the end of 2023 to almost 200,000. I started working with people one on one, doing mentorship, work with founders, with experts in different industries, coaches, and essentially help them grow their brands and their ecosystem. But last year, I found myself that I in this mode of like almost being stuck, right? Because of the fear that if I'm gonna make content, if I'm like, the more I'm gonna grow, the more I'm gonna obviously attract a lot of attention. And because this space is so weird with core scammers and all of them, how are people gonna perceive me? And I've noticed with a lot of people, especially in the early stages, there's a lot of fear of, like, in terms of being seen, right? There's a lot of fear in terms of, I don't want to grow too much or too fast because people are going to perceive me in that way, especially like if I'm in the business space. And I find it really interesting, right? Because oftentimes with content, with life in general, we're the ones that are really like in our own way. There's nothing stopping you right now watching this video. There's nothing stopping you making a lot of money, making 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 per month with content, getting brand deals, flying all around the world, traveling, obviously escaping your 9 to 5 if you're still there, growing, like speaking your truth. There's nothing stopping you, but you might also have this fear, right? So before we dive in, just a little bit more context. So I realized, like, for a couple of months, even earlier this year, this fear was so strong because I was essentially looking at the space and I had this thought, like, the more I'm gonna grow, the more people are gonna perceive me as one of them. And I never fucking wanted that, right? I never wanted to be one of the funnel boys, never wanted to be one of the Miro boys, the gurus that just, fucking overwhelm you with all of these the fucking systems and the flywheels and the funnels. I never want to be that, right? Never wanted to be. And basically, that whole fear, which was just my fucking mind, which wasn't justified at all. That fear completely like stopped me, and it made me push the brakes, even on a subconscious level, in terms of me creating content and coming up with like better video ideas, more helpful videos on Instagram and on YouTube as well. And so then I just completely got rid of it. And the way I got rid of it was essentially understanding that, look, if you create content from a genuine place of actually wanting to help people, if you create content of, from this place of, I really want to make a difference, I really want to help, I really want to create something that goes beyond my industry, that transcends industries. Everybody that I work with so far, experts, founders, like actual CEOs, coaches, everybody transcends their industry. And so I realized, like, if you come from that genuine place, there's nothing that you got to fear. There's nothing you need to fear. And I realize also, to most of you watching, still this space might be new. You might get into this roller coaster of, creating the content, and you might see everybody. And again, it's this idea of, how are people going to perceive me if I step into this market, if I want to sell a course, if I want to sell one-on-one coaching? Are people going to think I'm a scammer, right? So this is the video, basically, how to build a cold brand without being a scammer. Because hopefully, if you're watching this so far, if you're still watching, you don't want to be one of them, right? Like, you don't want to scam people. You actually want to build a brand that stands out. You actually want to make a difference. So, I have some notes in here that I want to go through. The very first thing is this idea of like, why do cult brands win in the first place? And we can talk about the big brands, we can talk about Apple, we can talk about Nike, talk about multiple brands. But in general, why do cult brands win? They win because they don't just get followers, they get believers. And they build this idea of, they create this feeling of belonging. And I talked about it multiple times. So when you're growing a brand, when you're building a brand, a cult brand, you want to get people to feel like they finally made it to the right sort of tribe. So this idea of belonging, you can see it with Apple, you can see it with even artists, The Weeknd, Prince, Michael Jackson. When people were listening to their music and are listening to their music, they feel like they relate to them so much and connect with them on such a deep level that they just belong. And it's almost like this symbiotic relationship between the artist and the listener. And it's the same thing here between the expert and the believer. Because again, with this idea of the cult brand, you don't want just random followers. You don't want just like random clients. You want believers. Every single one of my clients is a believer in my ideology, in my thesis, which is essentially growing an iconic brand around who you are. Forgetting about the whole fucking copy paste funnels, the VSLs, like 2026, and I'm gonna make more videos with this. 2026 is gonna change a lot of this like space, because it's not gonna be focused as much on build a funnel, build a VSL, build a flywheel, run ads, and is actually gonna be focused around building cold brands that stand out. So again, the reason why they win is because it's not just about manipulating people to follow you or download your lead magnet or buying your course just for you to scam them. Obviously, it's actually about creating a deep connection between the expert, the creator, and the believer, the viewer, and turning the viewers into actual believers. So this is all about human psychology and human wiring. We're wired that way. We're wired to essentially want to we're striving for building connections, genuine connections. You probably have your favorite brands. It could be Apple, it could be a different brand. You connect with that brand not because of the products, but because of the thesis behind the brand, because of the identity that that product gives you. And it's the same thing with content. If you watch my content, it's not just about the strategies. You watch my content because of the way my mind works, because of my thesis, because sometimes I might have a take that is not 1000% like the best take ever, but it's my take, right? And that builds connection. So this is why the cold brands win, as opposed to just, being another influencer or being another coach or being another guru. Because you can make a lot of money with that, don't get me wrong. But for how long? For how long? If you want to go 10 years in this game, 20 years, if you actually want to put yourself on the map as a huge name, as a huge brand, you got to think to yourself, am I trying to scam people? Am I trying to just make a quick cash grab, or actually build a legacy brand, right? So I guess that's one question that you got to ask yourself constantly. What am I trying to build here? What am I trying to build? How big do I want to go? How far do I want to take this? What level do I want to take this at? Right? So that's why cold brands win. And the question isn't, in terms of this idea of building a cold brand, the question isn't should I build a cold brand? Because a lot of people, when they hear the word colds, they automatically attribute that to a negative thing. The question shouldn't be should I build a cold brand? The question again should be, do I want to build a legacy brand? Do I want to build something that stands against the test of time? Or am I just trying to be one of them? Am I just trying to fit in? Right? So that's the very first thing. Now, the second thing, there's a clear line between the cult type of brands and the scammers. Because the scammers, and I'm not going to drop any names in this video because I don't have to, but the scammers essentially constantly try to entice you to buy their stuff. They try to convince you. They try to use all of these manipulation tactics. They try to get you to spend money. And look, I've spoken to people that literally spend $100,000 on coaching and on mentorship, on access to inner circles from these big scammers. And they don't even have access to the fucking mentor, which to me is just mental. It's just crazy. And so what they're trying to do, the biggest difference is the scammers and the gurus are constantly trying to sell you. And if you notice, they change their offers every 5 minutes. This week is a mastermind, next week is another course. The following is going to be a webinar, all of this new shit, right? Why? Because they have a lot of bills to pay and they constantly have to come up with a scam. They constantly got to come up with that. They live in places and they take responsibilities and bills and stuff, expenses that are just way beyond, like the overhead is crazy. So they have to essentially make the money back with all of these different scams. That's how you can spot a scammer. Someone who is constantly trying to sell, constantly trying to get you, they use fear-based marketing, right? So they can tell you something like, if you don't buy this now, you're never going to make it. If you don't get this now, you're never going to succeed. And the more they do that, obviously, the more money they could make, but it really hurts the perception. And if you're someone smart, if you look at that, you can spot that, right? So that's the biggest thing in terms of the scammers. Another thing is they create this idea of like false urgency, and this is what I mean by sales tactics. They create this constant, like, only like 5 spots left, but in reality, it's not just 5 spots left, right? They constantly sell that shit. They constantly sell that offer. They also isolate people from external opinions, and they try to get them on calls and they try to manipulate them and whatever, just to get their fucking credit card. And essentially with all of this, they're trying to promise outcomes they cannot really deliver on. Because it sounds good, they do these crazy guarantees to get you in, to get you to spend your money. And once you're in their world, once you're in their ecosystem, they don't really give a fuck, right? They don't really care about you. But they do that because, again, it's fear mongering, it's FOMO, whatever, to get the money in. Which on some level, you can respect in terms of business. But then again, you got to ask, for how long can you keep that up? Because it's all going to come crashing down. And you got examples of people, they cannot literally pay their appointment setters. They cannot pay their team members because they rented out that fucking Lamborghini. And now they don't actually have the money to pay their team, which to me is, again, it's crazy. So that's the very first thing. With cold brands, on the other hand, again, this is basically, I touched on it in the beginning, it's this idea of actually creating this idea of belonging, actually giving something to the people that whenever they get into your ecosystem, they realize, okay, this is an entire universe, right? It's not just this course. It's not like it's an entire fucking universe. I get to connect with this creator. And they obviously deliver real transformation. And with cold brands, that doesn't mean they do not sell, right? Because there's a nuance to this. There's a caveat. No, it just means the way they sell, the way they communicate, the way they create content is very balanced, right? So you got educational content, you got value content, you got lifestyle content, and you also got some selling in there. But it's all in the way you essentially communicate with people. And again, going back to the fear, if you genuinely, like in your heart, if you come from a real place of actually wanting to help, actually wanting to make a difference, you don't need to worry about all of that. Because the more transparent you are and the more raw and honest you are, people are going to see that. The more people are going to see that, the more people are going to connect. The more people are going to connect, the more believers you're going to have. And then the more believers you're going to have, the more money you're going to make. And again, I'm not saying as a cold brand, you cannot sell or you shouldn't sell. No, this is business. I sell my offer, right, of one-on-one coaching, one-on-one mentorship. If you're interested, link is down below. So it's not about that. but it's in the way you see, like, even the communication, even the way you talk on camera. It's not this idea of like, buy my course right now, guys, because this is going to expire in 5 days and you got to do this. Like, no. Because cold brands understand the idea of, again, building a universe, getting people in, building an identity, building a cult. I talked about it before. Don't just build the typical personal brands like Guru style. Build a fucking cult character. Build someone that people will literally form an army for. Build something that it's almost like an icon in the industry and transcends that industry. And you can look at the biggest names. This is what they're doing. And obviously you have some big names that are just scamming left and right. But that's the main difference. So on one side, you have the aggressive manipulation tactics that are trying to get you in, trying to get your money. And then on the other sides, you have the cold brands that are trying to deliver a real fucking transformation. They're trying to help. They're trying to create the idea of belonging. They're trying to build a community. Because with AI, with everything, with the new technology, with everything that's going on, with social media, what do we desire as human beings? Because we haven't changed. As human beings, we haven't changed at all. We still desire connection, community, human connection. Why do you think I'm doing one-on-one coaching and one-on-one mentorship? Because it's me and the client right there. I'm building the brand with the person. We get on calls. We talk on WhatsApp. We even joke about stuff. We talk about real life. Why? Because people need a connection. And you cannot achieve that with just AI. You cannot achieve that with courses. And again, courses are useful. You can learn, again, if you want to build something that actually delivers value, you can build something amazing. That's not the issue. Courses are not the issue. It's just the kind of like perception, and not perception is silly, but the place that people are coming from when they sell courses or coaching or whatever it is, right? So that's the biggest difference. Now, I put in here, because I want to talk about like the 5 cold mechanics really quick. I touched on this before, but the very first thing is this idea of cold brands have a shared enemy. So usually scammers don't do this. Scammers just, again, try to sell you on a system, whatever. But cold brands, you can look at, again, Apple, you can look at Red Bull, you can look at Nike, you can look at whatever. They have an enemy. I talked about it before. I don't want to touch on this for 20 minutes, but having an enemy as a brand is basically you standing against an ideology that you genuinely fucking hate in your industry. So for me, it's basically what I'm talking about now. Is this idea of the funnel gurus, the funnel boys, this ideology that, you gotta manipulate people, you gotta convince people to buy, you gotta do all of this. No, I'm standing against that. So what happens when you have that shared enemy as a cold brands? People, when they follow you, they realize, okay, this person is standing against this thing that I also hate. So that creates connection, right? That's the very first thing. The second mechanic is this idea of identity transformation. So you got to realize people don't necessarily care about features in terms of products. They care about the transformation that those products deliver. And so, in other words, when someone enters your world as a brand, what is the identity that they're trying to achieve? What is the identity that you're trying to help them build? And at that point, it becomes an idea of, okay, when you join us, when you join the tribe, when you join this world, this is who you will become. And again, that gets people to connect, right? So it's this idea of transforming their identity and not just aiming to sell a product, going deeper than that. And again, you can study the biggest brands. This is what they do, from artists, from tech companies. This is what they do. Apple doesn't just sell you products like a laptop or an iPhone. It gives you status. It gives you creativity. It gives you new ideas, right? It gives you all of this. The third mechanic is, again, this idea of exclusive belonging, right? So you almost create this like in-group effect with like shared language. values, rituals that you constantly talk about, constantly present as the creator, as the expert. So when people, again, join your world, they feel like, okay, I really belong and I'm really adopting this language. I'm adopting this ritual that this creator has. So again, it's still on an identity level. It's not just products. The fourth mechanic is basically polarization. So when you're building a cold brand, you need to understand that you need to polarize people. You will have that camp that will fucking hate you. And then you will, on the other side, you will have that camp that loves you. And in order for you to do that, you need to have the courage to show up and just speak your fucking mind. A lot of you watching, you might be afraid of speaking your mind because of the perception, because of whatever. But if you fucking hate something in your industry, we go back to the enemy, why not speak your mind? Because you having the courage to show up as yourself, and I know it sounds cliche, but you having that courage and actually stepping up and being able to be abrasive even and polarize people, that will inspire the right people. That will inspire the right ones. So polarization. The fifth mechanic. This is meaning over product. So cold brands have this idea of, again, it's more about the meaning of the actual brand and the movement rather than just the product, just the course, just the offer, just the whatever it is, even if it's a physical product. And one good example that comes to mind is Nike, what they did with Jordan, with Michael Jordan. Because it wasn't just about the shoe, right? And I think Michael Jordan's mother said something like, it's not just the shoe, because the only reason why people give a fuck about the shoe in the first place is because my son wears it. So it's this idea of meaning over the actual product, the physical product. We wouldn't care about the Jordans, right, if it wasn't for Michael Jordan, because we know the meaning behind that shoe. So it's very interesting. Because the product, in this case, is again just the vehicle for belonging, just the vehicle for introducing people into that world. It may be something physical, maybe something like an offer, digital product, something tangible, something that gets results, but it's just a vehicle. So in other words, and I tell this to my clients, the minute you crack the codes, so to speak, in terms of building your cold brand, that this is what I'm helping people do, around who they are, the minute you crack the code, the offer doesn't really matter that much. It does, but you could technically sell anything. Because again, it's just a vehicle. It's just the introduction for people to become true believers, not just clients, right? So that's very good. Now, in terms of this whole thing, there are a couple of questions you got to ask yourself, right? Before using and implementing these concepts into your brand and actually building that cold brand, right? The very first one is, would I actually be proud to make this public, to talk about this publicly? Would I be genuinely proud about this? That's the very first one. The second one is, does this genuinely serve them, my audience, my people, my army, or just me? Because if you're in it, and obviously I'm not sitting here being super fucking noble, it's got to be for you as well. But if it's just for you and not for people, not for the people, not for you to make a difference, then you're not building a true brand. You're building a cash cow, a cash grab, right? The third question, am I actually delivering what I'm promising? So I have this offer, I have this digital product, I have this course. Does it deliver what I'm putting in the marketing? Or am I just grifting people, right? The fourth question, can they leave my ecosystem easily without any shame? Or am I shaming people? Because you can see this with scammers. You can see they're actively shaming others, shaming their like own audience for leaving because they caught up to the fucking scam. So that's another question. And the last one ties into this. It's, am I genuinely attracting people, or am I trying to trap them? Because if you're trying to attract, you're doing the right thing. But if you're trying to constantly trap people and use fear tactics and use all of this fucking bullshit, you're a scammer. You're like them. And I'm not saying you are. But all of these scammers, that's what they do. They're not trying to essentially attract, they're trying to trap people in that ecosystem. Oh, I got the money, whatever, I'm out. Right? That's what they're trying to do. So take this video, go through the main points again, and really sit and think, what am I trying to build here? How far do I want to take this? Am I trying to build a legacy brand? Am I trying to build something amazing here? Or am I just trying to be one of them? Am I trying to fit in just fit in? And again, if you, coming back to how we started, if you genuinely have that fear, you need to assess, because this would really click for me. I literally took a look in the mirror and I was like, dude, you come from a fucking genuine place. What the fuck is this fear? It's not justified. So again, take all of this and genuinely apply it to what you're building. And I promise you a lot of things will change. When you let go, first of all, of the fear, and when you genuinely have the intention to build an iconic brand. I'll see you in the next one.